Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in a time when every decision could mean life or death? In the heart of the wild lands of the Old West, a place where the sun beat down mercilessly and the dust seemed to never settle, the enigmatic figure of a cowboy named Silas Boone. He was no ordinary man. He didn't seek applause. He didn't crave recognition. He appeared like a silent ghost, transforming a moment of despair into a story that still defies time. Who was Silas? Why did he choose silence as his most powerful weapon? And what drove him to risk his own life for a girl he never even knew? Imagine a barren landscape marked by the distant sound of horses' hooves and the watchful gaze of outlaws roaming mercilessly. It is into this setting that Ayana, a young native woman, small and defenseless against the cruelty of men willing to do anything to achieve their goals. Perhaps you've never faced bandits in an unforgiving desert, but have you ever felt vulnerable, with no way out, waiting for someone to lend a hand? This feeling is universal, and it's in it that this story finds its strength. It was at that precise moment that Silas Boone revealed himself. A man with a low hat, a firm posture, and almost no words. He didn't need fiery speeches or grandiose promises. All it took was his presence, a quick gesture, a look filled with determination. What you're about to discover may surprise you. In a land ruled by fear and violence, Silas chose to be the exception. He didn't want to be remembered as a hero, but his actions resonated far beyond that dusty afternoon. Stay with me until the end, because this isn't just another story of gunfire and duels. It's about courage in silence, about how compassion can emerge where you least expect it, and about the power of a stranger who decides to act even without witnesses. Think for a moment. What would it be like to have your life transformed by someone who wants nothing in return, who leaves no clues as to where he came from or where he's going? That's the fascination surrounding Silas Boone. The Wild West has been the stage for countless stories of outlaws and sheriffs, of injustice and revenge, but few arouse as much curiosity as that of this mysterious cowboy. The image is almost cinematic. The sun setting on the horizon, a frightened girl surrounded by danger, and a lone horseman who appears at the exact moment all seems lost. Have you ever experienced this? That moment when someone arrives at just the right time and completely changes the course of events? This is the essence of the legend surrounding Silas Boone. As the story unfolds, every detail reinforces the mystery. The girl's gaze, the hero's silence, the tense atmosphere that hung over the desert. Some say he was a gunslinger seeking redemption. Others believe he was a spirit sent by the tribe's ancestors. What is certain is that his name was not recorded in newspapers or official records. Instead, it came to life in saloon conversations, in stories told around the campfire, in memories that refuse to fade. And that's precisely where myth is born, in the absence of definitive answers, in the space that imagination fills with different versions of the same event. We may never know who Silas Boone really was, but that doesn't matter as much as the impact his presence had, because deep down, we all carry the hope that, amidst the chaos, someone will appear willing to protect us, even if only for a moment. And while the desert dust still hangs over that memory, a new part of the story begins to unfold, leaving an irresistible suspense in the air about what happened after that remarkable encounter. Silas Boone may have disappeared into the distance like a faceless mystery, but the power of his story lives on precisely because it makes us reflect on moments when someone appeared to protect or inspire us without asking for anything in return. And that's where I want to open a space for you. Has something similar happened in your life? A moment when someone unexpected made a difference, even in a simple but remarkable way? Share your experience here in the comments. Your voice gives even more meaning to this space, because when you share your vision, others are also touched and find a greater purpose in these stories. And since we're on this journey through the Wild West together, I sincerely ask you to like this video. It seems like a small gesture, but it's precisely what strengthens this channel, showing platforms that this content matters, that it's worth sharing. Your support not only helps this work continue, but also ensures that more people can experience these narratives filled with emotion and meaning. And if you feel that these stories awaken something within you, be it curiosity, nostalgia, or even inspiration, then I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Your presence here is what makes this community grow. It's what allows us to keep alive the tradition of telling stories that resonate deeply in the heart. Each subscription is like a link in this chain that connects people through memory, imagination, and emotion. Because in the end, it's not just about hearing about Silas Boone or a girl named Ayana. It's about being part of something bigger, keeping alive the flame of stories that carry universal values. And as long as that flame remains lit, we continue side by side, ready to discover what fate still has in store on that dusty Wild West road. The Wild West wasn't just a dusty patch of land lost on the map. It was a living stage, where every decision shaped destinies, and where the silence between two gunshots could mean the end or the beginning of a new journey. Imagine the endless horizon, cut by the incandescent glow of the sun, where the dust lifted like golden veils covering the vision. There, between arid plains and mountains that held ancient secrets, life pulsed to its own rhythm, full of risks and hidden opportunities. Small towns, often built around a saloon and a main street, were meeting points between different worlds. Settlers seeking to transform nothing into fertile farms mingled with travelers carrying dreams of fortune. At the same time, native tribes sought to protect their traditions and ancestral territory, while being pressured by the relentless expansion. Amidst this cauldron of interests, outlaws emerged, men who saw the absence of rules as an opportunity to instill fear and assert power through violence. The climate of tension was constant, as if the air were charged with electricity ready to explode. It is in this context that Silas Boone's story gains even more power, because he wasn't just a mysterious cowboy, but a man who chose to act in an environment where most preferred to remain silent to survive. Think about it. How many times in our own lives do we find ourselves faced with situations where the decision to intervene seems dangerous, but at the same time could change everything? The hidden truth behind the myth of the Old West is precisely this. It wasn't just duels that shaped people's destinies, but rather the silent choices made, the ones that never made the news, but had a profound impact on the course of a community. As settlers sought stability, many were forced to confront ethical dilemmas every day. Should they accept injustice in exchange for security, or defy power to defend the truth? Entire tribes needed to reinvent themselves, adapting ancient traditions to resist the advance that threatened to destroy their identity. Outlaws, on the other hand, were the embodiment of breaking boundaries, men who embraced chaos as a way of life. Between these opposing poles walked Silas, a character who seemed to embody this clash of mentalities. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding the Wild West isn't just about dusty landscapes and movie shootouts. It's about understanding how a society's transformation happens, through invisible tensions, through small choices that change great destinies. Every town, every tribe, every traveler carried within them a story of struggle, resistance, and adaptation. And it is precisely in this fertile ground of contradictions that figures emerge that transcend the ordinary and enter the realm of legend. Silas Boone, in this context, is not just the silent cowboy who saved a little girl. He represents the spirit of those who refuse to accept passivity in the face of danger. His journey is not made of fine words or promises, but of concrete action, driven by a mindset that values courage over recognition. And that's where the story connects with us, because on some level we all seek this strength. The strength to act when it seems easier to hide. The strength to make decisions that reveal our true essence. This is the least told story of the Old West. Not just lands conquered, but souls tested daily. And each person who crossed that dusty horizon carried with them the possibility of writing a different page of this saga. Silas chose to write his in silence, and that's what makes him unforgettable. Among the stories that have survived the test of time, few carry as much delicacy and strength as that of Ayana, the native girl who became the centerpiece of this story. The daughter of a respected tribal healer, she grew up surrounded by ancestral traditions, teachings passed down from generation to generation, and a deep connection with the land. Her name, which means eternal flower, conveyed exactly what she represented: purity amidst a world marked by disputes, tensions, and ruthless decisions. She was a child with a serene gaze, capable of conveying calm even in the most turbulent moments, but her innocence clashed brutally with the reality around her. As her tribe sought to preserve ancient knowledge, the region became increasingly pressured by the expansion of settlers and the conflicts arising from this clash of mentalities. Ayana was just a girl, but she carried with her the invisible weight of an uncertain future. Her father, the healer, knew that her journey would be shaped by challenges that might require more courage than any ritual or medicinal herb could offer. Still, he made a point of teaching her to see life as a web of connections, where every gesture, every choice, every word had an impact. The contrast between Ayana's innocence and the brutality that spread around her is one of the most revealing, behind-the-scenes aspects of this story, because deep down the Wild West wasn't just gunfire and dust, it was also an emotional testing ground where the vulnerability of children exposed the hidden truth of an era marked by greed. And in this environment, the girl became a symbol of hope. The shy smile she offered amidst adversity was a reminder that, even surrounded by chaos, there was still room for purity. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because to talk about Ayana is to talk about transformation, not just of an individual destiny, but of an entire community. The impact of her presence went beyond her own age. There was something in her posture, in her attentive silence, that inspired older people to reflect on their own decisions. Perhaps it was the way she observed the world without judgment, simply absorbing every detail, as if she understood that each revelation had value. Ayana's journey began there, like that of so many other children who, without knowing it, became the link between past and future. It's curious to see how innocence can be both strength and fragility. Strength because it inspires, because it reminds adults of what truly matters. Fragility because it is precisely this purity that awakens in others the desire to protect. Ayana walked between these two dimensions, and each step she took was a silent decision to continue believing that goodness existed even in a land dominated by injustice. Life within the tribe taught profound values, respect for nature, connection with the earth's cycles, the wisdom hidden in the little things. Ayana learned to listen to the wind as if it were a song, to observe the flight of birds as signs of change, to understand that hidden truth was not always in what met the eye immediately. This mindset shaped her way of seeing the world, but it did not shield her from external cruelty. And perhaps it's precisely this duality that gives her story such power. Because while many saw her as just a helpless child, there was a spark of quiet resistance within her, as if fate itself had chosen that girl to be part of something greater. The impact of her journey would not only be measured by what happened to her, but also by what it awakened in those around her, including that mysterious cowboy who would later change everything. Silas Boone wasn't just a man on horseback crossing the plains. To many, he was a shadow who appeared and disappeared without a trace, known only by a nickname that spoke volumes about his essence, the Silent One. His deep gaze held more than words could convey. It was the kind of look that pierced anyone who dared to look at it, as if it held hidden truths that would never be fully revealed. People saw him, but knew nothing about him. No one knew his origins nor the reason he lived in isolation, wandering between small towns and forgotten trails. And perhaps it was precisely this mystery that made him all the more fascinating. They said Silas had a habit of observing more than speaking. He kept his distance, always on the sidelines of events, as if carrying within him the weight of past choices that still echoed silently. Some believed he had been a gunslinger in his prime. Others swore he had sheriff's blood running through his veins, but that a bad decision had condemned him to exile. What no one could deny was that his presence made an impact. Even when he said nothing, everyone sensed something about him that was unusual. What was most intriguing was the way Silas seemed to be in constant vigil. His gestures were calculated, his steps measured, as if he lived in a permanent state of alert. There was a mindset shaped by losses and invisible scars, the kind of behavior of someone who understands that every detail matters, and that sometimes a fraction of a second can define the fate of a life. This silence was not empty. It was loaded with meaning, like a book whose pages no one has ever read. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding Silas Boone is understanding the value of solitude as a choice. For many, being alone may seem like weakness, but in his case, it was a journey of transformation. The isolation wasn't just physical, it was also emotional. He avoided connections, avoided revealing his pain, but at the same time, this distance allowed him to see the hidden depths of life more clearly. He saw what others ignored. He perceived risks before they became evident. And, paradoxically, it was this reserved attitude that prepared him to become Ayana's unlikely guardian. Amidst the chaos of the Wild West, where quick decisions determined survival, Silas seemed to carry his own philosophy, that acting at the right time was more important than words or promises. His hidden truth lay not in fiery speeches, but in the way he took a stand when necessary. This reveals much about his mindset. Unlike men who sought fame, recognition, or power, Silas seemed guided by an internal logic, by an invisible code that only he understood. This was his silent revelation. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone, just follow what he believed was right, even if no one ever knew his name. And this attitude left its mark on those who crossed his path. People sensed there was something greater about him than the image of a solitary cowboy. It was as if he were a living reminder that we all carry secrets, pain, and choices that shape who we are. The difference is that Silas didn't try to hide these scars with pretty words. He accepted their weight and turned them into action. This was his way of connecting with the world, even while remaining distant. Perhaps this is precisely what makes his legend endure through time, because Silas Boone is not just a character from the Old West. He symbolizes that part of us that prefers to observe before acting, that understands that silence can be as powerful as any scream. He shows that, behind the figure of an enigmatic man, there lies a journey of profound impact, built on invisible choices that reveal much more than any story written on paper. The silence that enveloped Silas Boone seemed to sense something dark was about to happen, and it wasn't long before the threat emerged with all its brutality. The region, marked by disputes and rivalries, was a breeding ground for men who lived outside the law, willing to turn fear into currency. Thus, a group of outlaws, hardened by greed and cruelty, crossed paths with young Ayana. To them, she was nothing more than an opportunity, a symbol to be used against their tribe, a means of exerting dominance through terror. The girl's capture was swift, almost like a gust of wind that snatches away something precious before anyone realizes what's happening. The injustice of this act echoed like a silent cry in the hearts of those who knew the value of her life. Ayana, with her innocence and deep connection to tradition, represented more than a helpless child. She was a link between worlds, a living hope that there could still be balance amidst the chaos. Seeing this purity ripped away so brutally revealed the hidden truth about these men's mindsets. There were no limits when greed and the desire for power guided their decisions. The behind-the-scenes story of this capture shows how vulnerability can be exploited by those who live in darkness. Ayana's tribe, despite their ancestral wisdom, could do little in the face of the speed and violence with which the hunters acted. The impact of this scene was not limited to the girl's fate, but to the devastating effect it had on the community. Fear, insecurity, and an open wound in the collective heart. It was the kind of event capable of changing the course of everyone's journey. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because talking about Ayana's capture is talking about the harshest side of the Wild West. There, justice wasn't guaranteed by written laws, but by individual choices. And when those choices were guided by selfishness, the result was always pain. The revelation that emerges here is clear. Evil never acts only in the moment of attack. It continues to reverberate in the aftermath, eroding hopes and testing the resilience of those left behind. What makes this part of the story so intense is precisely the contrast. On one side, the fragility of a child who carried within him the promise of transformation. On the other, brutalized men, incapable of seeing value in anything beyond immediate profit. This clash exposes the mentality of a time when the line between life and death, between right and wrong, was constantly challenged by those who believed that force could dictate the course of things. And yet, it is in this context of injustice that Silas's figure begins to gain even more weight, because even from a distance, he had already noticed the signs. The watchful eye that made him the silent one was not just a personality trait, but a survival tool. While many missed details, he saw them. He sensed the tension that preceded the danger. And when Ayana was taken, something inside him stirred. It wasn't just compassion, but a silent decision that carried the impact of a greater destiny, not to allow innocence to be crushed by cruelty. This is the revelation that begins to unfold. Behind the brutality of outlaws, there is always the possibility of someone choosing to resist, even when all seems lost. And this choice, however solitary, has the power to change not only the fate of one person, but of all those who orbit around this act of courage. Silas Boone appeared as if he already knew exactly what needed to be done. There was no hesitation, no room for doubt. As the threat loomed before everyone's eyes, he moved with the firmness of someone who understands that certain decisions cannot wait. His gestures were precise, swift, almost as if each movement had been rehearsed 1,000 times before. But what was most impressive was not just the effectiveness of his actions, but the complete absence of any vanity. He didn't seek recognition, didn't look around to see who was watching. Silas acted as if he understood that true courage doesn't need applause, only conviction. The moment he advanced, every detail around him seemed to align with his silence. The dust kicked up by the horses' hooves, the astonished looks of the outlaws, the metallic cold of weapons poised to fire. None of it distracted him. Silas possessed a mindset, shaped by absolute focus, a clarity that transformed tension into precise movement. While others might have lost themselves in fear or calculating risk, he let his instincts guide every decision. And this instinct was fueled by something deeper than survival. The knowledge that Ayana's life could not be left in the hands of brutality. The scene took on almost mythical overtones. Silas moved quickly, but not impulsively. Every step was measured. Every action had impact. There was no wasted energy, no room for unnecessary demonstrations. It was as if he carried within himself a hidden truth. Heroism lies not in excess, but in precision. And this revelation became clear to those who observed. It wasn't a duel to impress the crowd. It was a silent act of protection, a gesture born of the decision not to allow injustice to prevail. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because Silas's courage wasn't just physical. What made his actions so powerful was the transformation it represented. In a world where so many chose to remain silent, where fear paralyzed entire communities, he decided to act. This choice is what separates those who passively observe from those who change history. And at this point, we realize that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward even when fear screams at us around every corner. This mindset of acting without seeking recognition is one of the greatest revelations of his journey. How many times in life do we fail to make important decisions because we fear not being valued or recognized? Silas demonstrates the opposite. He didn't need applause. He didn't need witnesses. The simple act of protecting Ayana was enough. And this simplicity carries a huge impact, because it proves that the greatest feats don't depend on an audience. They depend on purpose. The scene unfolded in near silence, broken only by the dry sounds of rapid action. The contrast between the hunter's violence and Silas's assured calm showed who truly had control over the situation. It was as if in that moment, he became the embodiment of the justice the Wild West lacked. And the curious thing is that even in the face of such a grand act, his demeanor remained discreet. There were no shouts of victory, no speeches, only the firmness of someone who had done what needed to be done and was already preparing to move on. It is at this point that Silas's figure transcends the image of a simple cowboy. He becomes an archetype, a reminder that true heroes don't need fame. They prefer silence to glory, concrete action to the illusion of recognition. And this kind of revelation is rare because it shows that behind an enigmatic appearance can lie a force capable of inspiring generations. The moment after the confrontation was not marked by the sound of weapons, nor by the fear that filled the air. It was marked by silence, a silence that seemed to carry an almost sacred weight. Dust still hung in the wind, and amidst that scene of newly broken tension, Ayana, still teary-eyed, turned to Silas Boone. Her look wasn't just one of relief, it was a mixture of gratitude and awe, as if she knew she was facing something that went far beyond a simple act of courage. It was as if she had understood, even at such a young age, that this intervention would change not only her life, but the course of an entire story. Silas, true to his essence, didn't seek grandiose words. What came out of his mouth was simple, yet charged, with a power difficult to explain. "You're safe now, little one." That was all. 3 words that sealed an invisible pact, a gesture that conveyed more than any speech could. His voice was firm, low, almost like a whisper that mingled with the wind. There was no room for promises or explanations. There was only the raw truth of someone who did what needed to be done, expecting nothing in return. Ayanna didn't know how to react. Her hands were shaking, but at the same time, a strange calm settled over her body. The impact of that encounter surpassed all logical reasoning. Silas didn't present himself as a hero. He didn't seek admiration. Yet, in that moment, he was exactly that. A silent hero, someone who preferred to let his actions speak for him. It's curious how in life there are people who leave their mark more for what they don't say than for what they try to say out loud. And Silas Boone was the personification of that. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the scene of the encounter between the two reveals a powerful insight into mindset and decision-making. On one side, we have the innocence of a child who learns early on the value of protection and courage. On the other, a man marked by past choices, who understands that every act carries a weight and an impact that goes far beyond the moment. This hidden truth becomes clear here. Sometimes, the greatest transformations happen in the simplest moments, when there is no audience, when there is no recognition, just the pure essence of someone acting according to what they believe is right. Silas's gesture of mounting his horse immediately afterward, without even waiting for thanks, speaks volumes about his journey. He didn't need to linger. He wasn't seeking to build a bond. His role was different: to appear when needed, fulfill his conscience's dictates, and disappear like a shadow on the horizon. This attitude affects our perception of value, because deep down, we're accustomed to associating importance with what's visible, with what's recognized. But Silas shows us the opposite, that there's a silent greatness hidden behind the scenes that doesn't need the spotlight to be real. For Ayanna, this encounter represented more than a rescue. It was a revelation about the kind of power that exists in the world, a power that doesn't announce itself, but manifests itself in specific, precise, almost invisible decisions. And that's precisely why this moment becomes so memorable. Because while he freed her physically, he also planted an emotional seed within her, the idea that silence can carry a greater impact than any cry of victory. Silas Boone, as he turned the reins of his horse and prepared to ride forward, left behind not only a resolved scene but an even greater mystery. Who was this man? Where did such certainty come from? And why choose silence when he could claim glory? These questions had no immediate answers, but precisely this lack of explanation made his presence all the more enigmatic and unforgettable. As the dust began to settle and Ayanna's heart finally slowed, the tribe, driven by urgency and desperation, arrived on the scene. The warriors, the elders, and even the oldest women rushed to find the girl, and what they saw was relief mixed with amazement. She was safe, alive, her eyes still shining from the impact of what had just happened. But around her, there was no sign of Silas Boone. No shadow, no distant silhouette, no sound of heavy footsteps across the barren earth. The man who had risked everything to save her was already gone, as if he were nothing more than a fragment of wind crossing the desert. All that remained were the footprints on the ground, signs that the dust insisted on erasing. The trail didn't lead to the village nor to the tribe, but rather disappeared into the vast horizon, as if indicating an unknown, unreachable destination. And this further heightened the mystery surrounding that encounter. Who abandons the chance to be celebrated as a hero? Who forgoes recognition to lose themselves in solitude? These were the silent questions that echoed among those who witnessed only the aftermath of their passing. For the tribe, that disappearance wasn't a gesture of coldness, but of revelation. It was as if Silas wanted to teach that certain acts don't need to be seen to have an impact. This hidden truth resonated with everyone. Sometimes, the greatest power lies in acting and then stepping aside, letting the value of the gesture speak for itself. It was almost as if he understood that remaining could weaken the force of the event itself, because his presence could be transformed into something commonplace. What he left behind was precisely the opposite, the memory of something rare, almost impossible to explain. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, Because Silas's disappearance isn't just an escape or a refusal of human contact. It represents a deliberate choice, a decision, laden with meaning. Behind the scenes of his journey, there was a mindset shaped by the idea that glory is fleeting, but the impact of a silent gesture can last forever. By refusing to accept applause, Silas preserved the pure value of his attitude, keeping it intact, untainted by the desire for recognition. This reveals much about the transformation he himself carried within, no longer a man seeking fame, but someone committed solely to the truth of what he believed. The scene of the tribe, embracing Ayana as Silas disappeared into the distance, is a powerful portrayal of this duality. On one side, the community celebrated their restored life, the relief of having the girl back. On the other, the growing feeling that they had lost the chance to know the one who had become, even unintentionally, an unlikely protector. The void left by his absence spoke louder than any presence could. It was a void full of meaning, laden with unanswered questions, and it was precisely this void that made Silas Boone a legend. This is the revelation few understand. Often the impact comes not from how long someone stays, but from the exact moment someone decides to leave. Silas showed that true strength lies not in clinging to what others think, but in following the journey guided by one's own conscience. He was like a living enigma, a man who appeared only when necessary and disappeared before his essence could be captured. And this, more than any feat, was what made him unforgettable. Silas Boone's absence didn't erase his presence. On the contrary, it was precisely his disappearance that gave birth to something greater, the legend. What began as an isolated incident soon spread across the plains and small towns of the Old West. The story of a silent man who had appeared from nowhere, defeated cruel hunters, and returned a native girl to the safety of her tribe, began to be told with varying details from each mouth, as if the mystery itself fueled the popular imagination. Some swore Silas was simply a gunslinger scarred by his past, someone who carried the guilt of past decisions and sought in that act a form of redemption. They said his gaze held more than firmness. It held a shadow of difficult memories, of battles waged not only against men but against himself. This version of the story made him an example of transformation, the bandit who finds in the act of protecting a child the chance to rewrite his destiny. It was the narrative of second chances, a powerful revelation for those who believed that no one was beyond the possibility of change. But there were also those who believed Silas was never merely human. For many, he was a guardian spirit, a kind of entity that appeared when innocence was threatened. This magical mindset gained traction especially among the older generation, who saw in the cowboy figure a manifestation of something greater than flesh and bone, a spirit that traversed deserts and mountains, always attentive to the most vulnerable, disappearing before it could be captured with questions or thanks. For them, Boone had neither past nor future. He was only the necessary present, the immediate impact that prevented cruelty from triumphing. The curious thing is how these versions intermingled and circulated in taverns, around smoke-filled tables and glasses of cheap whiskey. Each narrator added their own detail, transforming Silas into a living myth. At night, around campfires, entire families would repeat the story to their children, who listened attentively as if it were a hidden life lesson in fable form. The name Boone, once unimportant, became a whisper laden with mystery, repeated softly as if the very mention of it could summon his presence. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the construction of this legend reveals something essential about the human journey. It's not just the action itself that generates impact, but how it's remembered and transmitted. Silas's absence gave way for his story to be shaped by the collective imagination, proving that often it's the invisible behind-the-scenes events that give more power to an event than the actual event itself. This revelation exposes the hidden truth of how narratives become bigger than individuals, and how seemingly small decisions can resonate across generations. The legend of Silas Boone shows that it's not titles or accolades that build a reputation, but the meaning others attribute to our choices. He didn't worry about explaining who he was, nor did he seek to control what people would say about him. And precisely for this reason, he left room for everyone to project onto him whatever they wanted to believe: redemption, protection, justice, or mystery. This multiplicity of interpretations is what keeps him alive in our memories, because each version of the story reveals more about the teller than about the story itself. And here's the most fascinating point. Silas Boone didn't need to be present to continue to influence. His absence was presence, his silence was voice, his distance was proximity. And it is in this paradox that the legend finds strength, as a reminder that true impact depends not on permanence, but on the intensity of a moment lived. Silas Boone shows us that the greatest heroes don't need recognition, only courage. This is the essence that remains when we strip away all the embellishments of the stories that repeat themselves over time. Because in the end, what truly impresses is not the roar of applause, but the quiet strength of someone who chooses to act when no one else dares. Silas left no statues or marks in official records, but he left something much deeper, an invisible inspiration, capable of spanning generations like a flame that never goes out. And perhaps this is precisely the secret that transforms men into legends. Courage, in his case, wasn't made of rehearsed words or heroic speeches. It was born in the decision to face danger without waiting for someone to call him a hero. This is where Silas's mindset connects with something universal. How often, in our own journey, do we encounter situations where acting seems too risky, where the easiest option is to hide behind silence for fear of judgment? The difference is that Silas used this silence as strength, not as an escape. He understood that there is a hidden truth in courage. It is not the absence of fear, it is the choice to move forward despite it. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because Silas's example reveals how we approach our own decisions. The impact of an act is not measured by external recognition, but by the internal transformation it provokes. Every time someone risks themselves to protect what is right, they are writing their own story, even if they are never remembered in books or songs. And that is the beauty of the invisible backstage of courage. It doesn't appear in headlines, but silently shapes destinies. If you look closely, you'll realize that Silas's journey is a powerful metaphor for the life of anyone facing daily dilemmas. He shows us that we don't need to wait for perfect conditions to act, because courage never arises in comfortable settings. It emerges in the heat of the desert, in the cold of the night, at the moment when all seems lost. This is the truth few want to see. We don't need recognition for our choices to have value. We just need the clarity that every decision has an impact, even if it's not immediately visible. The curious thing is that the lack of applause, rather than diminishing the feat, magnifies it. Silas had no audience, no spotlight. He was simply convinced that saving Ayana was the right thing to do. And this seemingly simple detail is what transforms his action into something magnificent. It's as if the lack of recognition were actually proof that his gesture was pure, without ulterior motives, without seeking reward. This is a rare lesson, one that leads us to rethink how often we fail to act because we hope someone will notice, someone will acknowledge. Quiet courage is the kind that moves mountains without needing to be announced, the kind that leaves invisible traces that nonetheless shape the world. And perhaps this is Silas Boone's greatest legacy, showing that in the end, the true value of a life lies in the choices we make when no one is looking. He teaches us that transformation comes not from pretty speeches, but from the simple practice of choosing the right even when it's difficult, even when it seems insignificant. And if you've made it this far with me, it's because this story of Silas Boone has awakened something within you too. This kind of narrative isn't just about the Old West, but about us, about how small decisions can change entire destinies. So tell me, if you were in his place, would you have left quietly or stayed to receive recognition? I want to see your answer in the comments, because it says a lot about how each person approaches their own journey. Oh, and since this conversation resonated with you, please leave a like. It's a simple way to strengthen the connection we've created and show that it's worth continuing to share stories that touch and transform. And if this content truly resonated, subscribe to the channel. This way, you'll continue walking with me on this path of revelation, courage, and learning. And you'll also help me keep this exchange alive, which only exists because you're here. And look, there's no need to stop now. There's another story right here that I'm sure will move you too. Click and continue with me there.